Jericho Forum Challenge. Paul Simmonds is giving it again. This is the second time I've seen him speak this week, which is pretty good. I think you'll enjoy it. I also would like to encourage you, I know there's not many, could you please turn off your cell phones or put it on vibrate and enjoy the session. Paul?
Thank you very much. Right, good afternoon. Welcome to the one of the last sessions, but the last one of the day for you folk, I guess, and me. Jericho Forum Challenge. A global challenge we've been running in association with Black Hat. This was actually launched at Black Hat in Amsterdam, Black Hat Europe, way back just after Easter, and is culminating here today with the announcements of the winners. Kindly sponsored, as it says, by Qualis. First of all, Jericho Forum is about this thing called deperimeterization. It's a real mouthful. Don't try saying it after you've had a few beers. What is deperimeterization? If you weren't here for the keynote last year, it's this. It's what's becoming accepted within the security industry, that actually in a large corporate environment, your border, your corporate border, your corporate boundary isn't actually a security boundary anymore. The reality of the situation is that you let through email, you let through web, you're going to be needing to let through voice over IP, you're letting through a whole bunch of encrypted traffic, and of course, everything but everything tunnels over port 80, doesn't it? The reality that is today that if you didn't realize it by now, if you actually, your business folk haven't realized it by now because, hey, you're security professionals, your border is effectively nothing more than the quality of service boundary. It keeps out the script kiddies, it keeps out the lumps on the internet, it keeps out the odd denial of service attack that's out there, but as a security boundary, it's not actually doing you any good. Reality says that protection has little or no benefit at the perimeter. If anyone is in the room from an IDS salesman, we can debate this one afterwards, but effectively IDS at your perimeter is like looking for a needle in a haystack. It creates so much information, so many false positives, so much log information that no one I know in a large corporation bothers to look at it. That's the reality of the situation we face today. And ultimately, it's easier to protect the data the closer you get to it. So that boils down to, for a corporate environment, one I work in, that a hardened perimeter strategy for your corporation, like my corporation, is totally at odds with either current or future business needs. It is as simple as that. We're going more and more mobile, you're getting more and more wireless, you're requiring more and more third parties, consultants, SOX consultants, auditors, a whole bunch of people coming into your corporate environment, connecting to your needing. The business requirement is to connect them to your LAN. And whereas the security folks, a couple of years ago, even 5 years ago, we stood a chance of saying only staff connect to our network. Today, that is becoming more and more difficult. So ultimately, your hardened perimeter, private WAN that's secure doesn't exist anymore. And if you're running a hardened perimeter strategy, I would argue with you that it's unsustainable. So that's what deperimeterization is. What is it actually? For us, it's a concept. Can you go out and get rid of your firewall today at your borders and just operate? Well, probably be commercial suicide. So deperimeterization is a concept. It's how you solve the business needs for our businesses in the future without a hardened perimeter. It's how, more importantly, your business leverages new opportunities. If you actually go and have the discussion with your business people as a security person and say, look, remember we used to have this thing called a border. And you know how you used to tell us that every time you want to do something new through it, we're the guys who say no. It's too difficult. Well, now you go and have that discussion with them and say, well, let's just play a thought exercise for a second. What if we didn't have the border? How could you leverage business to be faster, quicker, cheaper? And all of a sudden, your business people see your security folks actually that have something to contribute to the business. Deperimeterization is about assessor solutions within a framework. It's not a solution. It is defense in depth. We've talked for ages about defense in depth as a security community. The only people who seriously have the money to do it are the military. Everyone else just has this M&M model. You know, the hardened, crispy outer shell, and inside it's all soft and gooey. Once you're inside, that's it. You get in, you can go anywhere you like. It has to be business-driven. You know, businesses have been turning the screw on security folk for a long time now, saying security solutions have to be business-driven. So it's not a single solution, it is a way of thinking. So Jericho exists to challenge conventional thinking about the architectures we are using today in the corporate and large business environment. And there is a need out there still to go out and evangelize this and change existing mindsets, because there are still people out there operating, you know, large networks in multiple countries for a corporation, and when you go and say, actually, your border's pretty ineffective, and they go, heresy, can't do that. And you say, yeah, but you got hit by SASE, you got hit by Blaster, you probably got hit by SQL Slammer. So what good was your border then? But they still think it's heresy. General principles, this is what the Jericho Challenge was about. Is ultimately, can you operate in an insecure or a hostile environment? Because that's effectively what your intranet is becoming. Gone are the days where you could say, internet horribly insecure, intranet secure. You don't have to relabel it on your diagram. It goes, internet really horribly insecure, intranet only slightly less so. So can you operate in an insecure environment? Is it inherently secure? And by inherently secure, we mean everything is authenticated, protected against unauthorized reading and writing. Probably that means encrypted, but I don't want to necessarily say that has to be a mandate. And is it repudiatable? Can it communicate with all its resources securely just using internet and IP? Is it interoperable? Do we have assurance and trust that can be ascertained by another? Because we're all into joint ventures and business partnerships and doing business with other companies. You need a trust model that works across businesses, not just with your own business. It's easy to do it in your own business. You just put AD in, don't you, in a large corporate environment? Well, the reality is you need this stuff to interoperate with your business partners, because you can't maintain 1,000 of their users in your Active Directory, and vice versa. It has to be simple, it has to be scalable, because otherwise you get the n factorial complexity problem that we've seen before. Look what happened with PKI. More and more complex. You ended up trying to solve a reasonably simple problem. The concept behind PKI is pretty simple. But the reality is, when you tried to put it in, you had to put this whole complex infrastructure to make it work. And protection ultimately is close to everything, as close as possible to the item being protected. There goes the phone. So why the Jericho Forum? Where does Jericho fit into this? Well, why now? No one else was discussing the problem. Jericho is made up of some of the largest corporates in the world, of users, not the IT industry. And ultimately, a year and a half, 2 years ago, we were getting our doors beaten down by firewall vendors saying, our firewall is bigger, better, faster than his, and my deep packet inspection goes deeper than his does. And we were going, hang on a second, we don't want that. We want something totally different for our environment in the future. It is not in our game plan. Everyone was fixated on perimeter-based design. Someone had to stand up there, put their head above the parapet, and point out the emperor's new clothes or the king's new clothes to the world. Someone had to actually stand up and say, border security is obsolete, and we're living in a fallacy world if we're relying on it. Someone out there needed to start the discussion. I sit on the board of Jericho, and it's a non-paid position. I'm sponsored by my company to do it as part of my goals package, but ultimately I don't get any remuneration whatsoever. So what's in it for us? What's in it for me? Ultimately, I need products that we got to implement in the environment. And the reality of the situation today is that if I want it in 3 years' time, it is in someone's R&D lab currently. So unless we, as IT security professionals and practitioners, actually influence the product that is coming out of the manufacturers, we are not going to get what we need to implement in 2 to 3 years' time. That's just timescales and logistics. And we needed to stimulate a market for solutions. Enough people needed to stand up with enough spending power and say, we need deperimeterized solutions for our corporate environments. If enough of us stand up together and do it, A, we all don't get our heads shot off because everyone goes, heresy, you can't do that. But more importantly, the vendors take us seriously. There is a market for this product out there. So bottom, the challenge for us as the Jericho Forum is this. We believe that in tomorrow's world, the only successful e-transactions and e-business will utilize a deperimeterized architecture. It is as simple as that, and you have to have the solutions there. And you've only got 2 choices. You either sit back and let it happen to you, or you stand up, you help design the future effectively of this industry to ensure it fits your business needs. Now, these are the members and participants as of about a week ago. And you will recognize, hopefully, some fairly major names up there that globally operate. Interesting ones there. Both Boeing and Airbus, normally deadly rivals, see business value in participating in Jericho because they have a lot of common suppliers. We have UK government in there. Don't have the American government in there yet, which would be nice. Eli Lilly. We have suppliers in there now. We have banks in there now. We have some fairly major manufacturers in there now. If you think I'm spouting off about a fairly esoteric problem and no one agrees with it, well, this is the PITAC, President's Information Technology Advisory Committee. It's got a very nice foreword by George Bush in there. I don't think he understood it, but the reality of the situation, that it actually went to him and he signed it. So it's at least got some weight behind it. And it's got some very notable people advising. It's free. The PDF is out there. The reality is, they said, the weakness of the perimeter defense strategy has become painfully clear. It's a great paper. It's got deperimeterization written all over it. Butler Group. Deperimeterization has become more than an interesting idea. It is now a requirement for many organizations. This is hot off the press. This literally came out about 2 weeks ago. Jericho Forum is currently turning security models on their heads and is likely to affect more than the way companies look at orthodox IT security. So don't take it from me, take it from these guys who are looking at what we're doing independently and actually take it very, very seriously indeed. Ultimately, this is where Jericho is going. If you want to read more, it's very, very simple. This is the plug, jerichoforum.org. If you're not a Jericho member, you can go and access everything that's publicly available on that website, including the papers that we're going to talk about in a second, including the visioning white paper that is currently out, and you can see how Jericho is structured. It actually utilizes the forum of the open group. The reason we aligned ourselves with the open group is quite simple, is that absolutely everything that we do as the Jericho Forum, once it is approved, will be open and available to everybody. Fundamental mandatory requirement, even though large corporates are out there working on it, and we're paying money, and it's costing us for our senior people to be involved in this thing, Ultimately, all the output of Jericho, when approved, will be open. We do not see this as a closed community initiative. We need to make this as open and as inclusive as possible if it is going to work and if we're going to make a difference. So jerichoforum.org, take a look at the white paper, really good. Basically, Jericho's mission is to act as a catalyst, to accelerate the achievement of the vision by, first of all, defining the problem spaces, which is what the visioning white paper does. To communicate to vendors out there a collective vision. Because otherwise the vendors say, well, you're telling me one thing, you're telling me something different. How do I know what I'm supposed to be building? We're communicating a collective vision. We're challenging the constraints, demonstrating the market, and probably about a 3 to 5 year time period. Currently, Jericho has a whole bunch of working groups going. And we're being very aggressive with these working groups already in Jericho's existence. Jericho has only been in existence since January, a year and a half ago. Currently, we've actually finished 2 work groups and disbanded them in the time they've existed. We want to move this fast. This isn't a talking shop. Ultimately, the aim is to get papers out there so people can start building this stuff. 6 current working groups out there. This is what they're looking at. You will have heard a lot of these issues at this conference. Meta-architecture. What kind of architectures do we need for the future? Trust models. How you get trust to work pan-corporation. How you get two-way trusts. The moment we have great, the mainframe gave us one-way trust. The mainframe was God, wasn't it? And everyone plugged into it and had to authenticate against the mainframe. No one ever questioned, do we trust the thing we're connecting to? Of course, now we've got phishing out there, haven't we? And you really seriously have to question, do you trust the thing you're connecting to? And you've got no way of doing it because our whole model is based on this one-way trust model from the mainframe days. So trust models, very important. Technology and standards. What technology is coming down the road? What's actually in people's labs at the moment? What is being developed by the other standards groups out there? Requirements and ontology speaks for itself. Management and monitoring, because if you're going to start distributing security in a distributed model, you've now got an awful lot of stuff to manage and monitor, and how you're going to do it. And then we've got the bit that effectively I'm doing here today, which is the PR and the media bit, and the lobbying. And it's working with government, it's working with the bodies out there, it is speaking at things like this, it's running, or helping to run things like the Jericho Forum Challenge. So this is the way forward. Jericho Forum is out there to provide the thought leadership on all aspects of deperimeterization. But the strategy is very much of inclusion. We want everybody in this room, preferably, to be actively involved and contribute their bit. So how do we get everyone included in the process? Well, we've got formal working groups within Jericho, and that's great if you're a Jericho member. And membership requires your organization to sign up for it, ultimately. And yes, it's going to cost you money. It's not going to cost you much money. We'd have liked to have kept it free. It was free for a year, until such point that it became overwhelming and we had to get Open Group to manage it for us. And we had to start charging a nominal fee. But we all know that there are people out there working in small companies who can't get involved. So we're trying to foster academic links and we're trying to foster research links, and we're successfully doing that. We're continuing the evangelization. But the key thing is to promote the independent discussion and research, and this is where the Jericho Forum Challenge comes in. Competitions, like the Jericho Forum Challenge, to actually get people out there, Joe Public, individual security people, individual researchers, corporates, whatever, to actually get out there and talk about this, discuss it, write papers on it, contribute, because there's some fantastic stuff out there. If you think about it, we've got some of the world's leading experts at this conference, 2,500 of them, who are great at breaking stuff. And therefore, chances are what a lot of people do in their real day lives is mend it as well. They know how to break it. And if you know how to break it, you know how to fix it and make it better for the future. Well, the security model out there in the environment is broken. So what we need is the experts to go out there and say, yeah, we know how to break things, but we also know how to fix them and make them better. We can contribute to making this better in the future. I was being told earlier, someone who went to the wireless talk a little while back, the first half it was dedicated to how to break the thing, and the second half of the talk was dedicated to how to make it better and fix it on the Wi-Fi stuff. Absolutely key. We want to make it better and we want to fix it. So, the Jericho Forum Challenge. Done in collaboration with Black Hat. We launched, as I said, at Black Hat Europe earlier in the year. We'd have liked a little bit more time to actually publicize it a little bit more, but we actually got a very good response in the time frame we had, so I think that was actually brilliant. We were out there to challenge technology experts to design secure architectural solutions that are open, interoperable, and viable, that will operate in a deperimeterized environment. We got 8 papers back globally. And these were them. You'll be able to, you can pull, and all the papers are going to be available. So if you actually want to go and read what these people wrote, they are all already, they went up about 3 hours ago, up on the Jericho Forum website. So these are publicly available papers. They were fed 2 weeks ago back to the work group team leads. So already this information that is in these papers is actually with the work group team leads within Jericho, the Jericho Forum, and they are using the information that these people provided to actually start improving what they are doing and adding to the debate of what they have in their work groups. So those were the papers that were submitted. These were the judges. And here was the judging criteria. The first one, obviously, meet the architectural aims of Jericho Forum. Quite simply, there's this interesting difference, because people come up to me and debate this with me and say, well, Paul, what is the difference between what you're proposing and just actually plain good security? We've been doing this stuff called defense in depth for years, haven't we? And I tend to turn around them and say, well, first of all, you've been talking about defense in depth for years, but you haven't actually been doing it, or very rarely. And what is the difference between what Jericho is proposing with deperimeterization and good security? Good security is a fundamental foundation to deperimeterization, but deperimeterization is taking the architecture one stage further. It's saying, can I build a security model that basically will operate on the raw internet? Could I take, in theory, not suggesting you ever try this, so don't try this at home, could you, in theory, take your entire corporate environment and go out and buy DSL lines and plug everything in on DSL, on the raw internet? That's ultimately where we need to get to as a global community in the world. Because, hey, that's what we're doing at home, isn't it? When you go down to Staples or whatever and buy your $250 PC and you take it home, where are they taking it home to? They're taking it home to plug into a raw DSL line or a raw cable connection. And then, of course, they want to do e-commerce on it. But, of course, by then it's been Trojaned, and we know the story, don't we? Because, of course, Staples didn't sell it with AV or the firewall switched on or Service Pack 2 installed or anything else. We all know the story because we're professionals at the end of the day. The problem is Joe Public doesn't. Joe Public then wants to go and buy a $7,000 plasma screen because it's cheaper on the internet. And of course, the guy who's trying to sell it to him saying, well, I don't have strong enough credentials. I can't trust this transaction because, hey, your PC has been compromised. If the world is going to do serious e-commerce in the future, it has to have a solid foundation. At the moment, what we have is very shaky and getting shakier by the day. So yes, good security, but good security in the concept of deperimeterization. The acid test is, can I plug this system I mean, reality is I'm going to run it in my corporate environment behind some kind of corporate CRUD filter at the boundary, not a security boundary, and I'm going to run it probably behind a local firewall in a nicely operated computer center. But the acid test is, could I take that server, plug it into the internet, would it survive? And would it still operate? Could I still do e-commerce in that environment? That's the acid test. Have they proposed inherently secure solutions? Does it use or propose open standards? Because it's no good having a proprietary standard. Why did the web take off? Why does SMTP remain the de facto standard out there? Why are we still using FTP and Telnet? Because they are open standards. They might be lousy standards, but they are open standards. Is it cost effective? Because if it isn't cost effective, Joe Public isn't going to buy it, and corporates aren't going to buy it either. It's got to be easy to manage because, I don't know about you folk out there, I work in an environment where I operate in 355 sites in 55 countries with approaching 35,000 IP addresses. So it has to scale, otherwise it isn't going to work. From our point of view, we wanted something innovative but viable. From the papers that were there, we wanted people to demonstrate how their proposed solutions preferably would be self-maintaining, self-protecting, and self-healing to a large extent. Now, that goes with inherently secure. And you might think that's totally daft, but if you take SQL Slammer, and can someone tell me what port SQL Slammer hits? It's 15 something or other, isn't it? Thank you. There we are. So if you have a web server that has a TCP/IP stack in it that only talks port 443, which is HTTPS, I know that one, you see. If you have a web server that has its TCP/IP stack literally does not respond to anything other than 443, if you have SQL Slammer floating around your network, it ain't going to work. It doesn't matter, does it? You don't care. You don't care if you've got a SQL database on there, because it isn't going to be exposed because your TCP/IP stack inherently will only talk 443. But what do we do at the moment, of course? Every single port is open. We install the SQL on the box. It opens up the port, and it's vulnerable. What is wrong with this picture? What you have to remember is TCP/IP stacks and the protocols we're using today were built by a bunch of long-haired hippies in sandals who only actually wanted to talk to his mate down the road, and his trust model was very simple. Because they were the only two people using the protocol, they knew each other. And when he received a mail from Joe Smith, he knew actually the only other person using this protocol at the time was Joe Smith, and therefore there was no chance of it being spoofed. Of course, SMTP has got a little bit more complex since then with a lot more people using it. But there is no trust model built in to a lot of what we do today, and we're trying to put sticking plasters on top at the moment with a lot of the solutions we put in, because the trust model fails, because there is no self-maintaining, no self-protecting and self-healing. By default, everything is on and untrustworthy. And most importantly, which of the papers submitted contributed most to the Jericho debate? So that was the judging criteria. So, I said I'd be done in about half an hour. The results. Thanks to Qualys, first of all, for sponsoring the Jericho Forum Challenge. There is a total of $2,000 on the table here. And so what I really wanted, I wanted a sound card here with a roll of drums, but never mind. Thank you. In third place, and in good tradition, of course, in good, as all award ceremonies, certainly international award ceremonies, which is what this is. Andrew can't be here tonight because hopefully it's about 20 past 1 in the morning for Andrew, and hopefully he's tucked up in bed somewhere. Andrew Yeomans submitted a topic of blind public key, scalable disclosure-free credentials for e-business that model real trust relationships. To give you a brief flavor, just to whet your appetite so you go and read it. and I do urge you to go and pick it up off the website and read it. Blind public key very simply says we should not be leaving credentials, PKI credentials, secure credentials, and a whole bunch of other stuff lying around on our PCs for some Trojan to pick up, because it's actually daft. And proposes a very neat solution to this. If you think about it, what Andrew is trying to mirror here is what we do as humans. And this is what we do as humans has been evolved over thousands of years. And then, of course, we throw it all away and do something different in the IT world, don't we? We don't learn from our mistakes. So what Andrew proposes in blind public key is very simple, is that when I meet you for the first time, I don't know you from Adam. So what we normally do is we have some way of establishing trust, don't we, when we first talk. You either know someone, you've got someone in common, someone quite often makes the introduction for you. Says, Paul meets so-and-so, so-and-so meet Paul, yeah, I trust them, therefore the trust is inherited. From then on, I know who you are, don't I? I don't need that corroboration because I now know your face. So I need a lesser degree of integrity from then on to deal with you. Now, PKI, of course, you're making the PKI connection and you're doing strong authentication every single time you want a transaction, and therefore you need the credentials left on that machine for someone to go and steal or try to break the key store or whatever. What Andrew is proposing here is actually a really neat idea, or the judges thought was a really neat idea, blind public key. In other words, you make the initial transaction using a smart card or a token or whatever. Gives you really strong authentication. But then you take the token away, and what you leave in place is a unique blind public key which only has enough information unique to that transaction between those two devices. And then you can keep on transacting because you've done the initial communication. So really neat idea, really good paper. I commend it to you to go and pull off the website and read. Judges' comments from it, our thoughts when we were discussing it, yeah, novel approach to an interesting problem, definitely. Definitely worthy of further study. It uses standard PKI at the moment to do the initial stuff, so yes, it's open standard. Yeah, absolutely relevant to making deperimeterization work and scale, both in the corporate environment server to server and both in the e-business environment, both B2B and B2C. Second place, Galwaz and Peck from Encipher. And again, Encipher aren't exhibiting here and couldn't be here, I'm afraid. Safety in a deperimeterized world is what they put forward through a reference architecture and a roadmap towards deployment. Again, in terms of paper highlights, they outlined a very good reference architecture, again, utilizing standards. How you can implement cryptographically based fine-grained protection. In other words, not this idiot protection at the border, fine-grained protection that will scale in a corporate environment. So it enumerates the 4 critical architectural building blocks, open standards. Very good paper. Again, thoroughly recommend it to you. A good read. And again, comments from the judges that were made when we were discussing it. Excellent study of how deperimeterized architecture could be implemented. Use of standards wherever possible. And the potential to scale it to the enterprise. We thought this was a good example of a reference architecture that would implement in an enterprise environment. And first place was a submission from AppGate called Balancing the Equation. Enterprises moving to a deperimeterized world need to adopt a core mentality based on controlled access to systems. In other words, we need to move away from the M&M model, where you get inside the hardened perimeter and you can go everywhere. And of course, the default access on all the systems is what? Guest. How many of your Windows system even have the default switched off to at least to be authenticated user? as the default allow all. But typically out the box, it's star at star at star, isn't it? It's just allow everybody in because, hey, they're on our network, so we trust them, don't we? And you'd be amazed. Well, anyone who's had a pen test done inside their organization probably wouldn't be amazed. But the reality is you'll be amazed how much information is freely available. Biggest culprit I found to date is anyone who sets up a temp drive. You know those wonderful temp drives that people set up because it's easy to swap and exchange large files without going through email? Well, of course, everyone drops the file on there, but absolutely no one cleans it up. Go and find the temp drives in your organization and actually go and have a look at what they contain, and you'd be horrified. We found payroll information on there, HR, human resource people appraisals on there. It's quite horrible. So as you move to a deperimeterized world, what you actually need is a much, much better way of fine-grained control. And again, what they are suggesting here is you need to go that step further than fine-grained control, because if you don't have access to that IP address, you shouldn't even be able to see the box. It's obvious if you think about it, isn't it? If you don't have access to data, if you don't have a right to be there, you shouldn't even see it's there. Think about it. What do we do at the moment? Well, we say, well, let's go and look at this box. So I find a Windows box on my network or a Linux box on my network, doesn't really matter. But I find a Windows box and it's got a share on it. So I drill down into the share and I drill down into the directory and I look at the files and then I try to pull the file and it says, can't have it. The reality is, if I have no rights to any of the files on the box, I shouldn't be able to see it. It should black hole me. It should just ignore me. So a very good paper and a worthy first place winner. I have to say there was a lot of debate between the judges on the first and second place, but in the end, it was a unanimous decision on the first place. So Appgate take our first prize of $1,000, and we will be sending checks to the winners in very shortly. Comments, standards based on that paper using Kerberos. It's practical. There's a potential to deploy it now or in the very near future. A lot of what they are proposing you could do today. And it's relevant to making deperimeterization both work and scale. So finally, go read the papers, www.jerichoforum.org. Get your organization involved in the Jericho Forum. Start the discussion go back from here to your businesses and start the discussion with them on how deperimeterization is going to affect you and how you might like to leverage it. And finally, if you want a slice of the prizes, this is the first, we hope, of many. So if you've got a good idea, if you can contribute to the debate, participate. We'd love to have you participate in the next Jericho Forum Challenge. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for attending. And if there are any quick questions, I'm sure we can take them. Otherwise, thank you very much. You go on.
I noticed when you talked about the groups of people involved, how come you don't have like the equivalent of the Department of Commerce? You have the cabinet for Britain.
That's a very good question, and we'd have to have them there. There are discussions going on.
And I guess the second question would be, with most governments looking at trying to be with the common criteria, how will some of the products being developed be acceptable in some of the venues if they haven't passed common criteria evaluation?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a difference between common criteria and common sense, ultimately, and a lot of what we require for common criteria isn't necessarily common sense. It's based on...
I don't disagree. I'm just saying, what's the impact on
Well, at the end of the day, one of the reasons, and one of the number of participants you see, is actually, more importantly, we saw the issue was to get the audit companies on board, so the Ernst & Youngs, the PwCs on board, because at the end of the day, the auditors have to sign off and quite often do a lot of your pen tests. So if you don't have them bought into the concept, you've got a major problem because you're not going to get signed off.
How about ISACA then?
Sorry?
How about ISACA?
ISACA will follow very shortly.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the trusted computing group?
Yes.
How do you see that fitting in?
It's a key component because if you can't, it goes back to, and actually one of the papers submitted is from a company called Bellark, which talks just about trusted computing. So trusted computing is a key part of this because unless you can trust the code that is executing remotely, the trust model is wrecked. So trusted computing falls right in the purview of the trust working group within Jericho. So absolutely. If we're done, thank you very much indeed.